Everyone loves Parallax. It sounds great, the concept is amazing, and its efficiency as a bass tone plugin is unparalleled. But what if you don't have it? Or what if Parallax didn't exist? I found that the low-end section of the Parallax plugin works really well. And although it can sound a bit boomy at times, I still find myself reaching for it most of the time when I need to dial in the bass low end. And I'll show you why. It even feels like there's something going on under the hood that isn't fully explained in the plugin manual. So I figured, why not try to replicate it? Or maybe even make it better? I mean, people have been making great mixes without this plugin for ages. A sound engineer should be able to dial in a stable, punchy and interesting low end, just like Parallax does. So let's dive in. By the way, for all the audio examples in this video, I'll be using tracks from a band called ENERGFREEZE. They're awesome guys and good friends of mine. We've worked together on a bunch of songs and their music fits this kind of testing perfectly. If you like what you hear, go check them out. I've left links to their stuff down in the description. So, there are different approaches to this. I've seen people limit the shit out of the bass low end, which in theory should result in a pretty even, sausage-shaped signal. But that's not always the case. There's also a downside to this. It can get in the way of the kick's punch. The main reason is the increase in sound pressure that comes from aggressive compression. A strange and fascinating phenomenon, if you ask me, but it exists. That's why there is an alternative approach, the one implemented in Parallax. First of all, let's see what the manual says about the settings the plugin uses for the low end. So here they are, and they are fixed. The fixed settings are attack 3 milliseconds, release 6 milliseconds, and the ratio of 2 to 0. I think what they meant is 2 to 1 ratio, so this is most probably a 2 to 1 ratio. And ratio is one of the most interesting things here, because it is pretty low. This ratio basically allows the bass to breathe. And the second most interesting thing here is that the low band signal passes straight to the graphic equalizer bypassing the Cabsim. So let's keep it in mind. So this is how the Parallax plugin sounds by itself. There is nothing more to it. The equalizer is just there to show the frequency spectrum. Here is how it sounds like. Sounds great, and oftentimes you can leave it like that and just forget about it. However, we can try to dial in something better, possibly. Now let's try to replicate the Parallax tone with the similar settings and other plugins. But there's also one thing to be noted before we proceed. If you build your low end purely from the DI signal, you'll end up keeping all the sub-frequencies. But do you really need them in the mix? In my experience, most of the time, no. But of course, it depends on the mix. I've seen established producers make use of them. Nolly, for example. I saw him bringing some of those frequencies back using R-Bass. Here's something the manual doesn't mention. When you dial in the low-end section of Parallax, it doesn't just filter out the high end, it also rolls out the subs, down to around 50 Hz, kind of like a real bass cab would do. I guess that makes sense, since this approach works well for most styles of rock and metal, which is exactly what this plugin is designed for. So you'll see me cutting out those frequencies in the tones I dial into. For this demonstration, I'll use the stock Reaper plugin, because none of the hardware emulations can get me the release that fast. And I'll remind you that the release is 6 milliseconds. So here are the settings, followed by the equalizer, filtering out up to 54 Hz, and 128, so 130. The Parallax was 133. Here's what it sounds like. Now let's compare it. Sounds alike to me. Let me know what you think if I got it right. Now let me show you which tone ended up in the song. We used a cab for this, so there's no need for additional high-pass filter. The limiter is there just to catch the picks. Now to me, the tone that ended up in the song just sounds a little bit fatter and more stable. I don't know, maybe because of the Cabsim or the compression settings we used, because we used 4:1 ratio. And although I think the tone we got with a low ratio compression is pretty close to the Parallax plugin, which was basically the idea of this video, but I personally prefer something in the middle between the low ratio compression and the evenness and stability of limiting. So let me show you how I usually approach treating the low-end portion of the bass. For this demonstration, I'll use my favorite 1176 plugin from IK Multimedia with 12:1 ratio. Interesting fact, but for some reason I usually don't like how the 8:1 ratio sounds. I think the reason can be the different knee settings the 1176 uses for different ratios. So 12:1 worked nicely in this context. Let's compare it to Parallax and pay attention to the third note in the sequence. To me, the chain that I got keeps this note pretty even with the rest of the notes. And when you listen to Parallax, it kind of sounds less prominent. Now, does this mean the sound breathes a little less compared to using low ratio compression? Yes. But I still prefer it, because to me, a solid and even low end is really important. I know some people who prefer more movement and breath in the bass, and that's totally valid. It's a trade-off, but most of the time I manage to shape the tone in a way that keeps the bass from getting in the way of the kick sponge. That's it, folks. Thanks for your time, please subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments.